I'm delighted to welcome you today to a session we're calling How Can Changing Neighborhoods Save Lives? It's a session created by our generous underwriter, the Southern Company. And I'm delighted to introduce, to lead the conversation, the Southern Company's President for External Affairs, Chris Womack. Chris, take it away.
Margaret, thank you very much. And good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for being here. Southern Company is, first of all, proud to be an underwriter for the Aspen Ideas Festival. And we've really enjoyed being here. We are headquartered in Atlanta, electric utility company with about 4.5 million customers operating in 11 different states. We make electricity is what we do. And so it's an enjoyable, fun business. But if you learn anything about Southern Company, the other thing that we really take a lot of pride in is making sure that our communities are better because we are there. And we have a motto that we are, in fact, a citizen wherever we serve. So community engagement, community involvement is something that we take very seriously and is an important part of our business model and what we request and require that our employees do. So here today, it's really exciting for us to lead this conversation about how neighborhoods can really help to improve lives. If you look what has occurred across the country over the past few weeks and months, there's been a lot of community unrest. And you can say, well, it's caused because of a lot of racial tensions. And I think some will also say it's caused because of a lot of economic and neighborhood issues that get to issues of economy, the economics, education, a lot of community development opportunities that need to be addressed. And so as we looked at this panel, looked at this topic, we wanted to identify, we think, programs that have been good models, that have looked at community issues, that have looked at family issues, that have looked at neighborhood issues and say, what can we do in terms of bringing about solutions? And so we've identified 3 wonderful, wonderful programs that we think not only lead great conversations about the subject, but have also brought about great solutions. And clearly there's a lot more work to be done, but we think there are some good role models and some good models that we can follow behind to say that we can be successful in addressing this issue. And so I'm pleased today to have 3 wonderful friends and also 3 wonderful panelists to help me with this conversation. To my immediate left is Zack Rosenburg, and Zack leads a program. He's CEO and co-founder of a program called the St. Bernard Project that started right after Hurricane Katrina. And it's amazing to think that Hurricane Katrina will be 10 years come this September. I mean, how quick 10 years go by. But we remember the travesty and the devastation that occurred because of Hurricane Katrina. But because of the efforts of folks like Zack and his wife, we've seen some good progress and some good work being done in the New Orleans community. And to Zack's left is Joe Barrow. Joe heads a program called the First Tee. And the First Tee, if you're a golfer, you see a lot of communication, a lot of advertising talking about First Tee. But First Tee focuses on how to use golf to help kids focus on quality of life and morals and a real moral compass using golf to help them better their lives. And so Joe will tell you about a lot of things they're doing. And Southern Company is proud to be the educational sponsor, educational supporter of the First Tee. And we have a wonderful, wonderful partnership with Joe and his team. And then to Joe's left, my dear friend Danny Shoy. Danny is president of the East Lake Foundation out of Atlanta, Georgia. And Danny can tell you a lot of wonderful work that the East Lake Foundation has done in the East Lake community and throughout the city of Atlanta. So we have a wonderful panel to help us, I think, have a good conversation about the subject about how neighborhoods can help improve lives. So with that, I'm going to ask Zack to talk about his St. Bernard project, some of the things he's done. And I mean, I was fascinated because I've talked to Zack, and Zack was in Washington, D.C. And then after Katrina hit, he and his wife decided to go lend a hand, which is very, very noble. But what happens with most of us when we volunteer? What do we end up doing? We end up going back home because we want to go back to where we came from. But guess what? These guys were so passionate, so engaged, so committed. They said, we can't leave the people here in these FEMA trailers. We've got to make a difference. So Zack, tell us a little bit more about the stuff you and your wife have been doing with the St. Bernard Project.
Sure, Chris. Thanks for having me, and hello, everybody. My name is Zack Rosenburg. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the St. Bernard Project, and I'll tell you from the beginning what our biggest asset was. we didn't know anything. So when Katrina happened, I was you're probably going to tune me out as soon as I say this, but I was a trial lawyer in Washington, D.C., teaching at Georgetown Law School, and finished a big trial, and it was the one, it's interesting, I'm with these folks here today, it was the one time after this trial that my wife and I took a trip that didn't somehow involve golf, and it changed the rest of our life. So my wife, mother-in-law, and I went to New Orleans 6 months after the storm. And before we went, Liz sent out 20 or 30 emails to a whole bunch of groups saying, hey, we're happy to help, we'll come down, we'll raise money, what can we do? And we got one response from a bunch of hippies in St. Bernard Parish who were feeding people. And so before we got there, we thought, you know what, maybe we've missed it. This is America. A third of the country's oil comes from this community. Maybe we've missed it. America must know how to recover from disasters. And we got down there and we saw it was the absolute opposite. Families who look like everybody in this room. The lucky were in FEMA trailers, and there were up to 6 or 7 people in FEMA trailers. Others were in attics and cars and garages. We got to know these folks. We fed them. We spent day in, day out with them. And so after 2 weeks, we didn't think we could just pat them on the back and say, have a good life, good luck, hang in there. We said we'd stay for 2 more weeks. We'd do the only thing we knew how, which was to raise money. And we'd go back to D.C. So we stayed for 2 more weeks. We asked all the institutional actors when they were going to start building houses. And we got this very cavalier and disappointing response. The response was twofold. First of all, it was, we've done disaster recovery the same way for the last 30 years. Why would we change it? Second was, building houses is phase 3, maybe phase 2, and you can't start phase 3 before phase 1 is over. And so with tremendous, I guess, indifference to grad school debt, we moved to New Orleans, and we started an organization knowing absolutely nothing that, since then, has built over 596 homes in New Orleans, over 900 nationwide. In any community we've worked in, we've built more houses than anyone else. I'll tell you real quick, and then I'm excited to hear from our other friends up here. What the mission, though, is the mission has changed a little bit, because we've seen in America disasters are happening more frequently. Look what happened to Lower Manhattan, the Rockaways. They're more severe, and they're hitting disparate parts of our country. So America has to decide, what do we want to be? Do we want to prepare for this? So we're now doing 2 things. Before disaster, we trained small and mid-sized businesses, homeowners, and municipalities to understand and mitigate risk, measuring success by whether behaviors are changed. After disaster, of course, we open up offices, but what we also do is train other organizations to use the SBP model to raise efficacy across the industry.
Zach, thank you very much. What a remarkable story. And I'll tell you, man, as much as I embrace what we do at our company, I'll always say, what makes a difference? What changes lives? What changes neighborhoods? Individuals. That's what makes a difference. That's what makes it happen. So you guys, that's some great stuff. Joe Barrow with the First Tee program. Golf is a very elitist sport for the wealthy, for the rich and famous. So how can golf change neighborhoods and change and help save people's lives?
Well, significantly. My name is Joe Barrow, and I'm the CEO of the First Tee. We started in 1997, and our goal was to introduce golf and the values of golf to young people throughout this country. And we built the platform to do that. We really think, Chris, that the character education is important to all of the young people in our country, whether it's perseverance or confidence, honesty, integrity. All of the 9 core values of the First Tee are important to each of these young people. We also teach them how to trust their judgment, how to have confidence in themselves, and we teach them things like goal ladders. How do you? It's not enough to set a goal, but what are the steps that you have to take to achieve the goal? And so we have done that in 175. We have 175 chapters throughout the country. We're doing that in some 7,000 plus elementary schools, and we're very pleased that Southern Company is our education patron, and they're going to help us get to 1,000 additional elementary schools throughout this country. So we have set a goal to reach some 10 million additional young people by 2018. And the reason why is that we want these young people to understand the importance of the character education and the social emotional learning that the First Tee has to offer. So we're very excited about that. We spend a lot of time and a lot of energy training our coaches. because if a young person doesn't understand that you care about them, they won't listen to you. And so we spend an inordinate amount of time as a youth development organization spending times with the LPGA and the PGA professionals, as well as our volunteers, to understand where these young people are coming from and how to touch these young people in a positive way, that will result in their taking action. And so we have really set our goals. Metrics are important. And so we want to have some 54% of the young people that are in the First Tee program be culturally diverse by 2018. And we're on that track. We have some 51% to date. We want 45% of our participants to be girls. We're 38%, and we have a long way to go, but that's when we started that goal, we were at 35%, and the golf industry was at 25%. So we're ahead of the golf industry, but we still want to be significantly contributing throughout our society. So we have set metrics, and they're very important to us. But more importantly, we want to see those young people, and I'll tell you later some of the anecdotes, but to see the smiles on those faces of the young people who didn't think that they were could finish high school, finish college, and go on to their careers. We are changing neighborhoods, and we're changing the young people and the parents and the other siblings that are brothers and sisters of our participants. So we'll start there, but we're changing neighborhoods for sure.
No, there's no question, and I've seen it firsthand. I mean, if you see some of these kids, as they have grown in the First Tee program, they not only learn the character values, but they also become darn good golfers, okay? And as a result, a number of them get scholarships to go to college. And so, yes, it in fact does change neighborhoods, changes lives, and changes families. Staying on golf, if you pay attention to golf, at the ending, the last tournament of the season for the PGA Tour is called the Tour Championship, which is hosted out of Atlanta at the East Lake Golf Club, and where you get the top 30 players. And if you go back in time, that East Lake Golf Club was surrounded by a neighborhood which had the highest crime rate. Its zip code was the highest crime rate in the country a number of years ago. Just poverty, crime, just very difficult conditions in the neighborhood. But today, if you look at that golf tournament and you do a flyover, you see a different picture. So Danny, what are you guys doing at the East Lake Foundation? What's your mission, and what are you focused on with your activities?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you all for coming. So my name is Danny Shoy, and as Chris mentioned, I am the president of the East Lake Foundation. We were founded 20 years ago. We celebrate our 20th anniversary this year, and our mission is pretty simple, and it was to transform the East Lake community and to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty. So how do you do that? You do that by transforming place, and you do that also by transforming people. I probably couldn't have asked to be on a better panel with both panelists, because I was listening to both of you talk. And so there's some interesting history there. So when I think about East Lake Meadows, which was a public housing development that was built in 1971 in Atlanta, Chris already mentioned that the crime rate was high. So the crime rate there was 18 times the national average. About 60% of the adults relied on welfare. You had a $35 million annual drug trade, and only approximately 5% of the fifth graders that went to the elementary school in the neighborhood for the East Lake Meadows were able to meet or exceed the math standard, which is our CRCT in Georgia, which is a relatively low bar. So that's really sobering. Through an unprecedented level of partnership and planning, our founder, working with the philanthropic community, the corporate community, government, and residents, were able to come up with a pretty bold and audacious plan to turn around that community. And what he thought about was, he had read an article, I'll tell you very quickly, quick story. He read an article in the New York Times that talked about 8 neighborhoods being responsible for the vast majority of criminals in the penal system, and went to the police chief in Atlanta and asked about a similar statistic for Atlanta. And the police chief said, in Atlanta, it's actually fewer neighborhoods that mass produce criminals, and none among them worse than East Lake Meadows. So it was very obvious that East Lake was the place to start. And as Chris mentioned, it was next to this gem in the East Lake community, which was the East Lake Golf Club, the home of Bobby Jones, a home course where Bobby Jones learned to play golf. So what we did was we set out, like I said, on a planning process, and through an integrated, holistic redevelopment plan that involved mixed income housing, cradle to college education, and community wellness, all led by a lead organization of what we call a community quarterback, which in this case is the Eastlake Foundation. We were able to transform the neighborhood over time. So if I go back down those stats that I just mentioned to you, I mentioned high crime. Crime is down 90%, violent crime, type 1 crimes. If I go back to education, and I should have mentioned that the elementary school there was the worst in the city of Atlanta and one of the worst in the state of Georgia. Now 98 and 99% of our students in the city's first ever charter school, which we started, meet and exceed the CRCT standard across all core academic subjects. With the mixed income housing, half of it is publicly subsidized by the Atlanta Housing Authority. The other half are market rate units. With the residents that live in the publicly subsidized units, 80% of them are employed. So think about 14% employment before, now 80%, that's pretty remarkable. And then with the community wellness aspect, we're really focused on the health and wellness, so we were able to bring a grocery store to the community. Prior to the redevelopment, Eastlake had been a food desert for 40 years. We were able to bring banks to the neighborhood. Eastlake had not had banks, so think about what that means for residents and their economic vitality. And we're proud to have a First Tee program. We're one of 2 First Tee chapters in Atlanta, the First Tee of Eastlake. So as I think about how communities get transformed, Chris said it well. We've seen a number of young people since the inception of our First Tee of Eastlake program graduate and go into college, some of them on full rides and full scholarships because of the First Tee of Eastlake program.
I mean, just a lot of incredible work clearly being done by your programs. Yeah, Baltimore, St. Louis, those things have gotten attention because of the difficulties they've had and the riots and activities that have occurred there because of police violence and other issues. Katrina's not in the spotlight now. It's 10 years ago. How do you guys keep things focused? How do you keep this work going when you're not necessarily in the public spotlight, when you're not getting that kind of TV attention? I mean, the cameras are not out there right now. I mean, you don't see, satellite trucks in your communities. So how do you keep the focus? I mean, how do you keep it going? How do you keep bringing the attention and the focus to make a difference with the work that you're trying to do?
So in New Orleans, as folks know, we're heading to the 10th anniversary of Katrina. And I just want to cite some statistics real quick, and thanks, Chris. First of all, let's talk about the good. New Orleans is a great climate for business. It's a wonderful place to do business. There's a brain gain. The schools are better. In fact, there's more restaurants. To live in New Orleans now, it's fantastic. I'll be there. I'm raising my child there. That is home, and I'm proud to be there and proud to raise our child in Louisiana. For the 5,000 American families, and let me be really clear about this, 5,000 American families who owned homes, right? And remember, in America, we're taught since we're young, work hard, buy a house, things will only get but so bad. It's kind of a social contract or compact in America. Work hard, buy a house, that's the American dream, be responsible. So for these 5,000 American families who are not home, they're not enjoying the rest of the New Orleans like the rest of us. They initially forecasted this would be a 15 to 20 year recovery. So it's important as we head into this 10th anniversary that we're mindful of all the good work, but that it's not done. If you run 17 miles, well, you've run more than I've run in 10 years, but it's also really far. But it's not a marathon, and you can't say you ran a marathon, and you can't say you're done. A marathon is 26.2 miles. In New Orleans, and we think America won't be healed until the recovery is complete. To address Chris's question head on, we have 3 core values at St. Bernard Project and an organizational ethos. Our ethos is what we call constructive discontent. We always want to be hearable. At the same time, we'll never be satisfied, so we're always growing. We're on target this year, the 10th year, when you'd think volunteers are going down, to having 10%, more than 10% actually, volunteers than the year before. One of the core values, though, I want to share with you as well, which is that we believe that human beings are hardwired. It's innate. We're hardwired to fix and solve and help. If I fell off this stool with a heart attack, you wouldn't think about it, you'd jump up to help me, right? It's innate, it's who you are. We start businesses. The real successful folks who start businesses don't do it for the money, they do it because they want to cause value or grow something or build something. It's about impact. And so we really think heading into this 10th year of Katrina, and in other parts of the country, we're heading to the 3rd winter in New York. There's tens and thousands of families who own homes, who are living on 2nd floors of gutted houses in Rockaway and Staten Island throughout the Jersey coast. These are first homes. These are working class people who can't afford to live anywhere else. We think the key is to sharing with the American public exactly who these families are, that they're us, right? They're human beings. These are people who have never asked for help before. But by volunteering or donating, there's a one-to-one correlation with that act, volunteering or donating, and very specific families moving home. And so I have faith in the American public. The way we keep going is we realize that there are people out there as diverse as can be, but what unites them is this compulsion to fix and solve and help. And I think it's on all of us to present very clear opportunities for people to engage. And if we do that, and if we show a clear correlation between action and impact, 99% of the folks will somehow get involved.
You know, Chris, one of the words that I would use is responsibility. And we teach these young people the importance of responsibility. And these young people are coming back to our chapters or coming to the chapters where they're living now, and they're understanding that they have to contribute to our society. And that responsibility is really going to bring the neighborhoods, whether it's New Orleans or Eastlake, to where we want it today. It's that level of responsibility. The other word that I would use is probably generational. And you have to think in terms of, if you impact the young people today, they will be your leaders for tomorrow. But if you don't instill with them the core values that we try and do, they won't be leading the way that you want them to lead henceforth. And they are 100% of our future. And so if you think generational and if you think responsibility, you will get to the neighborhoods and the importance of the young people in the neighborhoods, but how they influence the neighborhoods, their parents and their siblings, is very important. And that's what we're trying to do.
Chris?
And Joe, I mean, you guys focus a lot on low-income neighborhoods, minority communities, and how do you, I mean, some of these kids say, well, I want to be Tiger Woods, okay? Well, they're not going to be Tiger Woods.
That's right.
I mean, so how do you keep them, how do you engage them? I mean, how do you keep them excited about doing that rather than going playing basketball or football or some alternative today? I mean, how do you maintain that connection?
Well, one of the things that we do is we really are very specific with the young people about how many of them can be Tiger Woods or how many of them can be professional football players or baseball players or basketball players. And the reality is that's not going to happen. And so when we teach them how to set goals, we really want the young people to understand that they can finish high school, that they can go on to college, and they can have a career. So what does that mean? And how do you set a goal ladder to accomplish each of those? And so we really try and be honest with them, and our coaches are very honest with them that they can't, this is one track and this is another. If you want to try that track, the Tiger Woods track, that's fine, but you need to be prepared. If you're not prepared, you don't understand that you have to contribute in a way that's very positive to that area of the country that you live in, so that community.
And Chris, if I can go back to your, is this on? If I can go back to your question. So there are three words that come to mind, and that's hope, engagement, and ownership. So when you think about the communities across the country, when you think about Ferguson, when you think about Sanford, when you think about a number of cities, urban cores, where there is social unrest, and you think about the fact that in those communities that there was something that was broken or something that was not working. And so tensions form and they bubble up to the top. And so when I think about through the lens of the Eastlake Foundation and the work that we do, and I look at the blight and the despair that Eastlake was filled with and the lack of hope, you have to give young people hope, that there is something better and bigger than themselves. You also have to work on engagement. So one of the ways that we continue to do our work at the Eastlake Foundation is we are constantly working with our neighborhood association. We work with our partners who are providing services, our partners such as Southern Company, corporate partners, to continue to advance the dialogue about what has to happen and continue to happen in communities to have them to remain vibrant. So you have that conversation with adults. And then the ownership piece is really something you do with young people and adults alike. So I would say to you that I can't underscore enough the fact that when we did this transformational work in Eastlake that it was a planning process done with the residents and many of the partners. So it wasn't something done to them. It wasn't something done for them. It was something done with them. And you create a sense of ownership. So in as much as we've had unrest, and I talked to our young people, we serve some 1,500 young people, almost 1,600 in our cradle to college education pipeline, as young as 6 weeks old, 1,700, as young as 6 weeks old all the way through high school. And you begin to listen to them. If they have a sense of ownership that this is their community that they own, and the adults, then they're less likely to burn down the grocery store or tear up the school, or people have a sense of pride, but you have to help create and nurture that.
You know, and listening to you guys, this sounds pretty easy. Like the work that you've done has been very linear, and just, you know, you woke up one morning and you had all this success. But I know that's not the case. I mean, what are the challenges that you've encountered, that you currently encounter, whether it's volunteers, whether it's resources, whether it's institutional biases? I mean, what are the challenges you feel like you have to overcome to keep the ball rolling, to keep the ball moving, keep moving towards your vision?
So this time I'm going to jump in and speak first if I can. So one of the challenges is, and you said it really well, is that there is still more work to be done. In the case of the Eastlake Foundation, because we get recognition in a more positive way than we did 20 years ago with the Meadows, with the Tour Championship by Coca-Cola that's done annually with the PGA and through the support of Southern Company, there are a lot of people who think because of the generosity of our founder, because of all revenue streams that come from golf, they forget that we have to raise a significant portion of our budget through the contributions that come from foundations, corporations, and individuals to continue to do the work and sustain it. The biggest criticism, or biggest challenge, I would say, is the criticism, and it's the dirty G word that comes up, which is gentrification. And I want to say at the outset that that is not what we did. Transformation is not gentrification. Gentrification involves you creating ladders or chutes and ladders comes back to mind for me, of escaping out of communities. With us, that was not our intention. We were very intentionally 50% reduced, 50% subsidized units in the mixed income housing. So that was key, was having that on the housing. With our cradle to college education, Drew Charter School is 60% free and reduced lunch, 80% African American. And we recognize the benefit of economic and racial diversity, so I'm not speaking against that. But I often hear the criticisms of, well, only 28% of the people moved back after you temporarily relocated them to build mixed income housing. And I say, well, 28% is actually successful, because what we did was, for the first time in some of our families' lives, they had choice. And they were able to choose where they wanted to live, make choices about schools, when for 2 and 3 generations they had not. So those are some of the key challenges.
Oh, thanks. So we have, if you ask me about how we've failed or challenges, this could be 7 hours, but I'll distill it into about a minute and a half or 2 minutes real quick. So of course, like any nonprofit group, one of the variables that will impact our output is funding. More dollars come in the door, we can build more houses, very simply. Our mission, though, remember, is to not take a parochial view of clients. So if you get in the St. Bernard Project's line, you're okay. If you're served elsewhere, who knows? That's not the right answer. We serve the industry. So in the for-profit world, you keep your trade secret close, right? You don't want anyone to do it your way because you want to capture as much of the market as you can. In the people-serving world, we really think the right idea is, if you have it and it's working, share it. That's something we learned from Toyota. Toyota has a notion called Yokoten, and it roughly means if you do it well, you must share it. And Toyota puts that to proof. They actually train other competitors to build cars in a more efficient way. So one of the biggest challenges that the St. Bernard Project faces is to change the way the disaster recovery industry or ecosystem in America sees itself. Right now, success is determined by following a process. We did it the long-term recovery way, and they judge success that way. That's not the right answer, we don't think. We think the right answer is having very clear benchmarks. How many families moved into humane housing right after disaster? What is the time, cost, and efficiency of then moving folks back into their homes? Setting clear benchmarks. The problem is, if you set benchmarks, you may fail, you may not reach them, but then what you can do is improve. And so the biggest barrier we face, Chris, in our industry is changing the way success is measured, from following a process to very clear data-driven goals. We want to put ourselves out of business, but the only way to do that is to raise the efficacy of the industry.
Joe, challenges?
The challenges that we face really are, like my colleagues, are resources, but it's really to get the, and when we're dealing with that, and we're very fortunate in that regard. But the real challenges facing us is to really get the adults to understand that they can contribute to the outcomes related to the young people, and that they have something to invest in. And these young people are important to the adults. And so that's something that we have to work at and we have to get better at because we're having a positive impact on the young people, but we need to have a more positive impact and understand that the responsibility goes all across the entire neighborhood. And so it's the adults as well as the young people that have to get committed to the outcomes. Like Zack, we're very metric driven. We think metrics are important. Like Zack, we like to share. We think that it does take a village. The churches can't do it. We can't do it. Zack can't do it alone. Danny can't do it alone. But it takes all of us working together in order to accomplish the outcomes that we want. But if you don't set the goals, and if you don't have the metrics out there, then what are you striving for? And that's very important. And so that's how we've been able to engage individuals, corporations, and foundations, because we've been very specific about what we want to accomplish and when we want to accomplish that.
A couple other questions here, then we'll turn it open to the audience. But Zack mentioned you love to put yourself out of business.
Yep.
How realistic is that? I mean, do you guys see putting yourself out of business? Because whether it's Ferguson, whether it's Sanford, whether it's Baltimore, go through the whole litany of places, whether it's Detroit, whether it's, it doesn't end. Seems like things are getting worse rather than getting better from a community, from a infrastructure, from a economic, we talk about the disparity in economics today and income levels. So do you see yourselves being put out of business at any point?
I don't see us necessarily going out of business. It's very important for us, and that's why I use the word generational, because when we think about the young people today, we want them to understand the core values that we're teaching them. And so it is going to take a while for that to be incorporated in their being, if you will. And so we don't see ourselves going out of business. We just think we will get better at it because we're in the educational space. And when you're in the educational space, you just get better at what you do. And that's what we're trying to do.
So let's run the numbers, Chris. So I know that there are 35 million people that live in Canada. I know that there are 10 million people that live in Finland. And I know that there are approximately 4 million people that live in Denmark. And I know that because when you take that and you add that up, that's roughly about 49 million people. There are more people living, or just about the same amount of people living in the United States in poverty. 49 million people than there are people in all three of those countries. So when I think about our mission, which is to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty, as long as poverty exists, the Eastlake Foundation will continue to exist to meet that need. Also with our structure, because we are with our adults and families, 50% of our apartment units are public housing units, so they're subsidized, that we look at that as the ability to have families that suffer from intergenerational poverty move into our development, hopefully move up in terms of their economic status, and ultimately move out, because we know about the value of home ownership and what it means for economic independence. So we know that at any moment in time, we're providing people a ladder to get a step up. It's also critical for me to say, and I didn't say before, that through the success of the Eastlake Foundation's work, and you need patience capital and a lot of other things to do this work over time, a few years ago, our sister organization was formed, and it's called Purpose-Built Communities. And it has taken the Eastlake model, which is, again, mixed income housing, cradle to college education, community wellness led by a lead organization or a community quarterback, to 11 other cities, including New Orleans, places like Indianapolis, Oakland, Fort Worth. I won't run through all of them. And I just think it's interesting because we don't ask the same questions of the for-profit sector. So I think it's counterintuitive. We would not say to a Coca-Cola company, well, when are you going to go out of business? And I think it's a kind of unfair parallel for the nonprofit sector.
So Zach, when do you close your doors and say mission accomplished? We're going home.
So I'll give
gone fishing.
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. So in Joplin, Missouri, we completed all the houses that needed to be built. And the way we knew that is because we went door to door. We did this thing where we called it Blackout the Block. And we went to every single residence, every single structure in Joplin, and we found the families who fit our criteria, didn't have enough money to hire market rate contractors, had enough money to sustain the house, and they became our waiting list. Long after the other groups left, we decided we couldn't go home, we couldn't close the doors in Joplin, Missouri, until we completed that need. So I, with total respect, I think nonprofit groups have to be in the business of solving the problems. And I think the proof point is what's going on at Eastlake, right? Crime is down by 95%. There's a certain point it's not going to come back because people are getting a piece of the American pie, right? Because they're living in humane places to live, because there are clear goals for what young people want to ascend to, and there's a path to get there. So I think we do need to go out of business. In Louisiana, we have 5,000 houses to go. We're also turning the city's blighted properties into well-built, affordable housing in a way that creates jobs for at-risk young people and veterans. But I really think the nonprofit community needs to change the model and work ourselves out of a job. Why can't poverty end? We're going to end polio in this world. We're never going to address poverty unless we set out to lick it. That's my perspective.
Well, I think you can end poverty, but it's going to take a long time. And I think that's what Danny is saying, and that's what I'm saying, and I think that's what you're saying, Zach. But you need to set the metrics to end poverty. And that, once you set those metrics, whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or 15 years from now, we have to end poverty. Because poverty, when you think about it, is just killing this nation. And it's a matter of time that if these young people don't understand the responsibilities that they have, we have no country to thrive for. And that's why it's important for you. It's important for the companies like Southern Company and all of us to understand our responsibility that it's not acceptable to have 49 million people in poverty. It's just not acceptable.
That's powerful stuff. I mean, and I think it's highly appropriate at the Aspen Ideas Festival to talk about a goal of eliminating poverty and putting yourselves out of business. So, transitioning one more time, the old phrase, being a proud papa. I mean, so as the work you've done, describe some proud moments that you've had, whether it's with certain individuals or certain accomplishments where you just kind of, your heart flutters or you begin to cry, you just say, wow, I have done good stuff. I mean, describe one of those moments that you've experienced with your work.
I'll tell you one, and I may leak while I'm doing it right here. If so, I apologize. I'm thinking of two, and I'll pick Miss Donna in New Orleans. She was a hard-working person, worked her whole life, owned her home, bought it when she was 26, 27 years old, single woman in New Orleans, raised a family, raised grandkids in the house. She retired, did everything right. Storm came. She had flood insurance, right? She did it right. She had flood insurance. She then hired a contractor. The contractor did three things. One, the contractor knocked down her house. Two, the contractor took $90,000. Three, the contractor built a cement chain wall and left town. For more than 9 years, she struggled. We have a saying at St. Bernard Project. What we try and do for each and every client is to get them to finally lock the door from the inside. Right? That's when you're home, when you can lock the door from the inside instead of just visiting your house and locking it from the outside and going to stay somewhere else. She didn't even have a house to do. The proudest moment for me was when we built her house in under 3 months for less than the $90,000 she paid someone else to knock it down, build a wall, and leave. And that's what we continue to do. I'll tell you one other story, super quick if I can, because I want to share that this is just not a New Orleans program. There's a gentleman in Rockaway, New York named Mr. Dunn. And Mr. Dunn, if you think of proud American, it is him. He's a combat wounded veteran, Marine in Vietnam. He was, I always get it wrong, he was an iron worker or a steel worker. But the pride this gentleman had, talking about how he built New York skyscrapers, is something alone that would make you weep. We met Mr. Dunn when he lived in Rockaway. He had a one-story house, and he built in Louisiana what we call a camelback on the back, so an extra room and a bedroom upstairs. We met Mr. Dunn when he was living in his one-bedroom upstairs with this guy Dave, who we didn't know. It was just his neighbor, and his neighbor Dave's house got flooded, and someone else's cat. So there were 3 autonomous, distinct families living in this one bedroom. And Mr. Dunn couldn't ask for help. Dave called us to get to Mr. Dunn. When Mr. Dunn moved into that house, that was it. Thanks.
Well, there was a young lady who was involved with the First Tee out in California. And she, because of the First Tee, got a scholarship to New York University. We thought she was going to move back to California. But she ended up, and now, she didn't think that she was going to finish high school. She went on and she finished New York University, and she went on to become a producer at one of the major networks that you watch each and every day. But she understands the level of responsibility because she comes from a single-parent family. And her mother lost her house, or was about to lose her house, and she took the money that she was going to make, or was making as a producer for one of the networks, and gave it to her mother. She understood that her mother had sacrificed many, many years to allow her to finish high school and to go into college and to move from California to New York. But she understood that she was responsible for her mother during this time. The other story I will tell you is that there's a young man who I use, and he's my poster child. Having been with the organization for 15 years, he's no longer my poster child. But he literally wanted to be an engineer in Chicago. And because of the First Tee, he got a scholarship. He went on to become an engineer, and he is now working in the workplace. And he didn't think that he, too, would finish high school. He goes back to his neighborhood in Chicago, and he sees the young people who are still alive sitting on the street corners. And he's asking, why have they not gotten out? And the reason they haven't gotten out, because they haven't gotten lucky. And they're sitting on the street corner, and they're wondering what their future is going to be, and he's yet an engineer. Those are just 2 stories of how we have instilled in the importance of character education and the importance of setting goals and trusting their judgment and doing what they can do and what they want to do in the young people in this country. And those are just 2 stories that come to mind.
So you know, of course, I'm going to have to follow the lead and tell you 2 stories, but I'll make them very, very, very brief. So one is of one of our adult residents in the Villages of Eastlake, our mixed income housing development. And her name is Marilyn. I won't use her last name to respect her privacy. And when she moved into the Villages of Eastlake, she moved into one of our public housing assistance units, one of our subsidized units. She and her husband have several kids. Marilyn has now lived in the Villages of Eastlake for 15 years. So she moved in 5 years after the redevelopment of the Eastlake neighborhood. And it's amazing to watch Marilyn take advantage of so many of our programs and services. 2 of her children have gone through Drew and graduated. One started in the kindergarten, graduated high school from the high school where she went, because we didn't yet have a high school this past June, and is one of our scholars. She's on a scholarship going to college. The other, her youngest child, is just school age, and she's in our early learning, in our pipeline with one of our early learning partners. And Marilyn herself has taken advantage of a number of the programs that we have that Southern Company actually supports, where we work with adults to keep them connected to employment, which means finding them higher levels of employment or getting them connected to employment if they're unemployed, because that's part of the requirement for living in publicly subsidized housing. And so Marilyn has gone from making really barely enough for her family to get by in one of those subsidized units to now being able to brag that she makes a little more than $60,000 a year as a registered nurse. She started her own CPR health company Our colleagues, my colleagues at the foundation, helped her sharpen her resume, and so she is one of our biggest advocates and is a good example of someone who was able to move in, move up, and she's looking forward to the day that she moves out. So she's a huge success story. The other that comes to mind for me, and I'll do this quickly, is a young man, and I met him 5 years ago when I started at the foundation. He wanted to go to Georgia Tech University, and was concerned that his mom, single mom, wasn't going to be able to afford to send him to Georgia Tech. So he applied to Georgia State University, another one of our great public colleges in Georgia, went there, completed his first 2 years, and I'd say maybe, other than 3 classes, has all A's. So he completed his first 2 years at Georgia State University with about a 3.8 GPA. His mom comes to our office, and she's terminally ill, unfortunately. And she said to us, and I'm trying not to get emotional, I'm trusting the Eastlake Foundation in the way that I've trusted you and your charter school with my child, because I know I probably won't see him graduate from college. And so I've taken him on as a mentee, he's taken me on as a mentor, and with another colleague, doing some back and forth and helping him navigate the transfer admissions process to Georgia Tech. We went down to the Georgia Tech admissions office, made sure we shared what a wonderful young man he is, and he was all revved up and excited to go to Georgia Tech. Based on the time that he was going to get his transcript, he was a little nervous that he wouldn't get in, and he sends me a text, which I save in my phone and I look at every morning, no lie, weeks before his birthday, that he had gotten accepted into Georgia Tech, which is where he's going to school, where he will start school in August. And I'm just so very proud of him, and it's a reminder for me about the importance of the work that not just me, but everyone up here does, and that companies like yours support.
We just came from Washington, D.C., where we were one of 4 or 5 different organizations that included the Boys and Girls Club, included Communities in Schools, I think Big Brothers and Big Sisters, the First Tee, and one other. And that organization pulled all of the nonprofits together to see how can you share your programs, share your best practices. And as I said earlier, it's about sharing. It's not about keeping close to the vest, and Zack echoed that. In the nonprofit world, it's really very important that what works for us, we need to share. And if the character education that we have at the First Tee can be used in any other way, it's important. And as Danny said, he has the First Tee of Eastlake, and so we want to share that character education. It's very important for us to give as opposed to just receive.
So we are working on a number of public partnerships that make our work possible. So were it not for the partnership with the Atlanta Housing Authority, we wouldn't be able to have the mixed income housing development that we have. Had it not been for the public partnership with the Atlanta Public School System, we wouldn't be able to operate what is now the most successful, not just charter school, but the most successful public school in the state of Georgia when it comes to educating young people who are predominantly free and reduced lunch, so predominantly low income and predominantly African American, because we have to rely on the cost per student expenditure that we get from the Atlanta Public School System to be able to operate what we do. In terms of public-private partnerships, and partnerships certainly don't happen organically, in the interest of time, I didn't go into the story of the Eastlake Golf Club and all the partnership that happened with the corporations, because it's a corporate club, to be able to really generate the momentum that we needed initially for the redevelopment. But when I think about, and I promise you they did not pay me to say this is just an example of a good partner, of a partner like Southern Company, where they provide internships over the summer for our young people. And it's beyond, it's really bigger than the resources, and it's the way that your partners give of their time. So Chris Womack serves on the Eastlake Foundation board. Lee Birdsong, who is also an employee at Southern Company, has been a mentor for many of our kids in the First Tee of Eastlake, and also for our internships over the summer.
Thanks. So we partner as well with both other nonprofit groups and for-profit companies. With nonprofit groups, we're currently partnering with United Way, with Red Cross, and with AmeriCorps to make sure that communities across the country are recovering in a prompt, efficient, and predictable way. When we work with for-profit companies, though, I want to tell you the way that we look at it. We endeavor to engage with for-profit companies where they invest not just their dollars, but their cents. So we're going to spend the money, and we're going to spend it efficiently. We have a 9% overhead. We use it very efficiently. But we're going to spend it. the learnings that we get from companies, when the companies take their best asset, their people, right? If you think about corporations, the one asset that they have that will not depreciate, that will appreciate over time is their people. And when they take the people's best skills, aligned with the corporation's vision, business model, and invest it into nonprofit groups, that's where the magic really happens. Quick example, we spent 9 months with Toyota at a time when we had already built more houses than anyone else in Louisiana. After spending 9 months with Toyota, we reduced construction time by 48%. Wow. And you can put a number on it. It's a pretty worthwhile number.
That's a big number. Yes, sir.
Wes Hall, educational consultant, Los Angeles Unified School District. First of all, you guys are doing amazing work. This is amazing work and transformative work. One of the things I was interested in, Danny, as you talk about, I was looking at your program, Creating Responsible, Educated, and Working Teen Program. A couple things. One, we know we have to create pathways for our kids. It's not just getting them all dressed up with nowhere to go. I'd like to hear more about the pathways that you're creating, the model that you created, because it sounds like it's very successful, but particularly pathways for our kids. Once they go through school, they perform well. Now, how do we get them to now go into corporations, either career ready or college ready?
So our Crew Teens program, that's what you refer to, Creating Responsible, Educated, Working Teens. We started because our cradle to college education pipeline at one point in time ended at the 8th grade, and our students left us and transitioned back into the traditional public school system in Atlanta. And so we created this program that really engaged them after school and during the summer, because we know about what happens over summer with summer loss. And we wanted to really shore up our investment and make sure that we hadn't invested in our young people just to see some of it slip away during the summer. But I would say to you very quickly that we engage them in ways that are meaningful for them. So as I talk about the internships that our corporate partners have offered, and also nonprofit partners who've also offered our young people partnerships, we're always very thoughtful that they have to have meaningful connections, not just during the school day when they're going to school, because let's face it, all of us probably struggled when we were taking calculus, physics, or whatever. When am I ever going to use this again? But particularly with that program, for them to understand that there's a path, and then you connect them to mentors. So we're very thoughtful with where we place them to get those career connections. And I'll tell you, our young people sometimes, I'm the first one when they come to the office, they know that there are 3 or 4 things that I'm always going to ask them. So if they're in college, I want to know, how did you do last semester? What is your GPA? What are you doing in terms of campus, in terms of leadership, because a lot has been given to you, so you now need to pay it forward. And so sometimes some of them will skirt me, not too many of them, because they know that that's what I'm going to ask. So you have to stay connected and engage with them.
Good. Other questions? We got one here and one there. Here comes the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Tom Dunton, and this is a question for Zack, and particularly with respect to your concept of sharing your successes. There's another very large group of people scattered across the United States that are not in a single community, but are in need of assistance. And there are many NGOs and not-for-profits helping, but not particularly in what you're doing. And that's our returning vets, the disabled vets and the able vets who lost their homes or their families broke up. So my question to you is, are you working with any vet groups to help get houses built for them so they have a place to live and a place to begin to rebuild their lives?
Thanks for raising that. When we think about communities that are struggling, these are folks who have volitionally stepped into the line of fire for us, so thanks for raising that. St. Bernard Project has 2 programs to train and help veterans transition from combat back to civilian life. We have the country's 2nd Veterans Corps program, where veterans come back from combat and they serve in our AmeriCorps program. If you know anything about veterans, it's the thing that veterans are always looking for, the next mission. We have some wonderful success stories there. We also do the lion's share of our skilled construction work, electrical, plumbing, skilled carpentry, in-house in a way that creates well-paying jobs for veterans so that they can transition. We're in New Orleans, we're building a new headquarters. So we just closed a new market tax credit transaction with Goldman Sachs on Tuesday. Might have been Wednesday, Tuesday. and there's two veterans-related components to that. In the first phase, we're building a training center in the heart of New Orleans that's designed to train at-risk young folks and veterans in livable wage-paying jobs in the construction field. Second, phase 2 is to build 53 units of housing in a rapidly gentrifying area in New Orleans that's a third of a mile away from the VA hospital. We think it's the worst thing in the world that if they have this state-of-the-art VA hospital, that folks can't live near it. So that's phase 2. I believe very strongly in a few veterans groups. We think that IAVA is doing just a marvelous job. The leader over there is a friend and supporter of ours. And I'll say this, that if there are veterans housing organizations where we can partner together and help raise their capacity, we're glad to do it. One more quick veteran story, if I can. There was a Vietnam veteran, so we have two programs. The lion's share of what we do is build houses for folks, rebuild houses for folks who own them. We have, I think, 4 veterans on our waiting list right now. But we also turn blighted properties into well-built, affordable housing. We have a Vietnam veteran who we had rented his whole life, but because we were able to build him an affordable house, he was able to have a place that he could call his own.
It's great stuff. We probably got about three minutes left. Quick question for you guys. A lot of conversation today about race. What progress we made or what progress we have not made. Your comments on that as you do the work that you do, any comments or reaction to the whole subject and topic of race in this country today?
Sure. So what's interesting to me is
They were not prepared for this one, so.
what's interesting for me is when I look at Drew Charter School, our charter school that the Eastlake Foundation started in Atlanta. A number of times when I've spoken publicly, people have asked, well, your African American boys are doing so well. They are performing as well as their female counterparts, as their white counterparts. What's the secret? What are you doing with them that's different? And so as someone who is a black male, and once upon a time was a black boy not that long ago, my response is simple. What's working for them and what's good for them is what's good for everybody else. And some of the issues and challenges that we have when you look at low educational attainment for populations of our black boys across the country, it's because they've been denied access, equal access to those same resources and supports to start in the same place and not start behind where everyone else has. So I just think we always have to kind of put on that lens in this country of common sense that no one is asking for extra or asking for more. There is no entitlement there. Everyone is asking for a level of equality to access to resources so that they can be their best.
Joe?
So what I would say is that that there is still racism in this country. And until we understand it and until we admit it, we won't solve it. Once you understand that there is racism in this country, you understand that my success is really your success. And we need to address that. I don't think that the issues, and it goes both ways, I think the responsibility of African Americans and Hispanics is the same as whites. And that is that they have to understand that this is a beautiful country and that we all need to love this country. We all need to contribute to this country. And there's no free ride. And so once we understand that, we can deal with it. But we have to admit it, and we have to admit that there's racism, because until we admit it, we are not going to solve it. And if we're not going to solve it, we won't rid ourselves of poverty. There will be those 49 million people continually and continually and continually in poverty. And if we're going to set the metric to end poverty, we have to end racism.
So 3 quick things, and I promise they're quick. We're not there yet, by far, not even close. 2, I have hope because I've seen in the last 9 years over 120,000 citizens travel to New Orleans or other places where we work for folks who they don't know, where there's no relationship, complete strangers who invest in others in their time of need. And that gives me hope. At the same time, I think the solution is to see others like people we love. If we saw folks who don't look like us as our uncle or our parents or our mother, we wouldn't allow the sorts of situations that we allow to occur in America. there would be a public health crisis for the number of African American men and women who are shot every day. If we saw this as a medical condition that impacted people we love, we would not be in this position. So I think that's the solution. And we have to retrain ourselves because we've been taught lots of things about other folks that simply aren't true, and we can't paint with that broad brush. So I think in moments we need to see people's humanity. We need to work to see folks we love and folks who might not look like us.
Guys, on behalf of Southern Company, let me thank you very much for, one, the work that you do and the commitment that you have clearly demonstrated here today. And I so appreciate all the differences that you are making. And thank you, audience. Thank you for participating, and thank you for listening to us. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.